can you take us through a little bit the overall design of the film? How many episodes in total, and is there a kind of through line that you see?
The plan is for 6 episodes. These, as you saw, oddly enough, are episodes 2 and 3. And in a way, the sort of basic conceptual structure will be defined in episode 1, which starts at the dawn of film, but then focuses in on 2 filmmakers who we think sort of define the poles of documentary as it still exists today. Robert Flaherty, who basically created the idea of storytelling observational documentary and made a film that was a global hit, box office success, Nanook of the North, and Dziga Vertov of the Soviet Union, who basically defined the idea of the argument or advocacy film, films that were intended to change the world. We're using each episode, we hope, as a way of looking at a specific problem that makes itself manifest in a moment of time, both in history and in the documentary film. And the question I now get asked most often, which is the hardest question, is what is the last episode going to be about? And at the moment, I'm thinking that, and we're all thinking that one question we have to grapple with is, can documentary become as great a success as it seems to be becoming and still retain its very essence?
One just quick notice, David mentioned Dziga Vertov, whose man with a movie camera provides us our logo. And for the first time, you must be aware of this, Richard. In all the film critics of the U.S. Nominating the top 10, or is it 20, films ever made, and they moved Vertigo first and kicked Citizen Kane second. Sight and Sound did it. Well, your organization. And on the last, they elevated the last to the greatest, the list of the greatest films ever made, Dziga Vertov's Man with a Movie Camera.
All right. So going through, I'm sure there are lots of other ideas in terms of how you would look at these eras. Just for an example, in looking at the 1930s, one of the things that I wondered about, if it ever crossed your mind, was documentary has always been so linked to political events, things that were happening. Certainly one of the most filmed events of that era was the Spanish Civil War, which led to a plethora of documentaries really on both sides. And the war in the U.S. was often fought by these kind of competing documentaries that were going on. Wonder if you had any thoughts or whatever about that. Obviously you can't put everything in, but I was just wondering about that particular issue.
Did we have thoughts? Did we have struggles? Cindy can tell you, our editor, and Tom Hurwitz, whose father, Leo Hurwitz, made one of the two great Spanish Civil War films. We couldn't get them in. And we literally tried every hook in every way. We are determined not to do and then documentary filmmaking, or just the greatest hits documentary filmmaking. We wanted to try to create a narrative of what the 30s guys did, a narrative. And we hope we did. And David, of what the 40s guys and girls did. But, we also could not get Joris Ivans in, who is one of the great documentary filmmakers of that
These
era.
are rights issues?
No, they are just narrative issues.
Just narrative issues.
But I will say that we have a wonderful interview in the can that will come up in the 60s, I'm sure, with Marceline Loridan Evans, his wife and collaborator. And the night before that interview in Paris, I was watching the DVD of The Spanish Earth, and the thing that struck me was, and maybe is that there. Another question we always get confronted, or that we had to confront, was which version of these films are you going to show? That film actually, like Native Land, was changed and made as it went along, and there's a version that's narrated by Orson Welles, but then there are several other versions where they tossed that out because they didn't like it. So it's just the possibilities are limitless.
Well, I'm very happy that you brought to the screen the whole memory of the film and photo leagues, because they're really the origin, I think, of independent cinema. I mean, that really was the first real, I think, independent film movement in the U.S., so it's always great to see them evoked. John, if I could ask you, looking at the films today and seeing this kind of documentary, what does it evoke in you and your feelings in terms of the kind of work you did in Control Room and your other films?
Well, first of all, congratulations. I'm completely blown away. I just saw the last probably 40 minutes, but I'm dying to see the rest. So, congratulations. In Control Room, we were dealing with propaganda on both sides. We were filming in the U.S. military, Military Central Command, and in Al Jazeera. So obviously, this is fascinating to me to see the history of it. When we basically followed a military press officer from the U.S. and two of the Al Jazeera reporters. And they both admitted that both sides did a certain kind of propaganda. It's interesting. Now we're working on a film about the revolution and the last 18 months in Egypt, and state TV reaches about 80% of Egypt, of the population. It's the most heavily guarded building in Egypt. It's filled with soldiers. And it was the propaganda machine of Mubarak. And we've been in the square for the last 18 months. And because what state TV has been saying about the people in the square and continues to say about people that are fighting in the square is that they're a bunch of thugs and spies, and it's a machine that works. So when you're there with a camera in the square, there's a huge suspicion of you because of what people know state TV to have been saying about them. There's one scene in the film where, and we're coming to an interesting time right now where it's, you have state TV reaching all of these huge population of people, but then you also have the internet, right? So, one day we have one scene where basically these army trucks run over a bunch of people, kill like 26 people. And we go around the corner and ask the police and army what just happened, and they said, well, it's Christians and Muslims fighting. And that's what was happening across state TV. That's what was being said on state TV. But at the same time, you ask some of them, and they have this sort of slight smile, embarrassment on their face, because with people now having cameras and being able to film it and upload it immediately, they know that there's a whole other story that's going on that everybody has access to.
I had an odd sensation watching today, both episodes, because I found at a couple of points, I mean, as a citizen, I tend to be opposed to state propaganda, and as a documentary filmmaker, I tend to be more on the Flaherty side than on the Vertov side. But I found myself at a couple of points in both episodes saying, like, gee, I'm longing for the good old days of propaganda by liberal governments. Where they could say, where the government could put out a film that would go to all these theaters and people would see, this is why this flood is happening. Flood. I don't think there's been an effort like the Negro Soldier for the integration of the Army for gays and lesbians. And I'm sure it would help. So,
come on, David, and admit we approached a connection in the White House and said, "Don't you think you should make the Negro Soldier about gay and lesbian?"
We tried.
This is after Don't Ask, Don't Tell was going to be repealed. We knew it was going to be repealed, and we couldn't get. They're not.
It went to the National Security Administration.
But part of it is, I think, this flood of information. Just on the whole of the subject, I was looking at another documentary film, totally unrelated to this, but it was talking about Baltimore in the 40s, and an African-American woman was saying, well, we used to go to the movies because that's the only place we get information about the war.
Right.
I mean, the idea that you had to go and watch a newsreel made months in advance of when you were seeing to find out what was happening in the war. Whereas now, I mean, you're so flooded with information everywhere you go. There are screens everywhere, and it just has completely altered, I think, our relationship to news, our relationship to those images.
And I think that will be one of the other things we have to tackle in episode 6 is not only the flood of information, but the new expectation that you yourself can not only choose but manipulate, the gamification, as I think Jennifer Marin said to me. Whether the whole concept of narrative is going to have to radically change in